Mini episode 1374 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge Mini Episode 1374. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris, and it is time once again to get to our 2021 NCAA football preview. And for the last several seasons, we have been fortunate enough to do this with a good friend of the show, of course, from OurSports Central and other fine outlets that he writes for, Fran Stuchbury, and also a member of the FDH Lounge family as an FDH Lounge dignitary now, and we are very happy, as always, to bring him on. We had him on some weeks ago just because 2021 was a monumental summer in college sports, and especially college football, with some of the ramifications of conference realignment, players now getting paid, and some of the many different issues that are going on. So we took a big picture look at some of those issues. I'm sure some of those issues are going to creep into our discussion of this season as well, because it's just, there's no separating the landscape that we're going through. And of course, that includes, unfortunately, the COVID-19 resurgence. There's no separating that from what we're talking about on what should be hopefully an excellent season of college football, and hopefully in many ways at least much more closer to normal than it was last season, although with the Delta spread, we shall see. But as always, a pleasure to get on the show, Fran Stuchbury. Fran, my friend, great to have you back on. How you doing today, buddy?
Doing good. I enjoyed week 0. Got a little bit of flavor before the main course happens next week.
Yes, let's talk about that. Always some interesting games right off the bat here, and of course, the marquee one out there, and this wouldn't have been a marquee game any other week, but just basically in terms of what it was being compared to as far as what else was on the schedule, Illinois and Nebraska. Illinois for many years now, a downtrodden program through one coach after another. Nebraska not supposed to be in the same boat here. Scott Frost coming in, hometown hero, going to come save the program, had been successful elsewhere. And this is one of these things where I'm really starting to question myself, Fran, as far as my ability to assess some of these new hires, because this has happened a couple times previously. Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, I came in, and I've been an Ohio State fan all my life because my dad's an alum. So I'm like, uh-oh, it's about to get real now. Harbaugh's coming to Michigan. Not so much, but this has been even worse. This has been a Nebraska program that was really down and out when he got there, and is still down and out at this point. So I'm just starting to wonder, is there anybody you can believe in when they get hired to come back to an alma mater, even if they've been successful elsewhere?
Well, I think maybe he's too loyal to Adrian Martinez, because he's made so many mistakes the past couple of years. I mean, if I won the ball, scoop and score, then you had the guy, safety. I mean, and then you have a kicker that's supposed to be one of the best kickers in the Big Ten, missed 2 extra points. So it's just typical Nebraska. They find ways to lose, Rick.
They do.
Find ways to lose.
They do, but even if he wanted to make a move at quarterback, I mean, that depth chart doesn't strike me as being exceptionally deep. So in terms of what his options are, and actually, and that goes to sort of a big picture concern right there at the school, because again, recruiting athletes to Nebraska, that has been a difficult thing to do since the time of, I will say, Frank Solich, my guy, longtime Ohio University coach. But the Osborne, Solich years, you could still get great players coming to Nebraska. Since then, not so much. Frost was supposed to be part of the answer to that conundrum. And, I mean, the roster doesn't look appreciably better at this point than what he inherited.
Also, you have a new AD with Trev Alberts. So usually when I thought that selectors come in, Rick, they tend to want to bring in a better coach, or the current coach has to produce, or he is gone. Because now Scott Frost is 11-21 so far. 4 seasons in Nebraska. So if they get to like a 6 or 6, 7-5, I can see them giving one more year. But if they don't get to a bowl game, I see them pulling the plug on them.
Yeah, I believe the same, and I think it's going to be a very, very difficult issue for them to confront because, again, it gets to the issue of much like at Michigan, right? How are you going to upgrade on Harbaugh? Who's going to come there and take that job and be a demonstrable upgrade? And at Nebraska, it's the same thing, largely because of the recruiting issues there. So, yeah, I was a little bit surprised just because, again, I keep expecting things to turn around at Nebraska. And again, Frost is a smart guy. It's how he got the job in the first place. And, it's just a really, really puzzling kind of an issue. I don't follow the program on a micro level. So beyond any of the things you're talking about, I don't really know what his issues are. Because you wouldn't think it would be a thing of avoiding stupid mistakes and that kind of stuff, because that had not been a problem for him in his previous stops. But all of a sudden it is an issue there. Anything else from week 0 that really kind of grabbed you?
Well, UCLA getting off to a good start of victory against the Y, because it gives them a little game practice and play time before they play home against LSU next week.
Yeah, and that is going to be a very interesting game to watch, and a very, very important game in the Chip Kelly history at UCLA. And, as week 1 comes up, let's just start there before we start delving into the conferences, because it is going to be a tremendous, tremendous slate of games, as it always is. And I want to say, in Fantasy Football Draftology 2021, available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com and the FDHLounge.com. Of course, we have some non-fantasy content in there as well. You go to pages 15 and 16, we're talking about the NCAA season. We have a list of the top games of the season in our estimation. Number 1 on the list, number 1 with a bullet, Clemson v. Georgia at Charlotte, September 4th. And, of course, that is one of many good games Labor Day weekend, Fran.
Yeah, that's gonna be a great game. And the thing is, the loser of that game, Rick, probably still has a good chance to make the playoffs.
Yes. Although the thing is, though, with Georgia, every year is seemingly they're going to have to get past Alabama in the conference championship game. So it does raise the question, if they can't beat Clemson, how are they going to beat Alabama? It's possible. I mean, they could do that. But Georgia loses all margin for error if they don't win the game. And for Clemson, I'm not sure that the conference schedule is going to be impressive enough to really help them in the end there. So Clemson at least probably becomes a bubble team if they lose the game. Georgia, if they run the table, I agree with you, would still make it, but no margin of error for either team if they lose.
Oh, that's definitely true. I definitely agree with that, Rick. It's gonna be a fun game to watch. I mean, a lot of people are very high on Georgia this year, but they always disappoint, Rick. They always disappoint.
Yeah, and that's where it's really interesting that the Kirby Smart time at Georgia, the way that it started out and what it's settled into is it's almost like a Mark Richt times 110%. I mean, it's like it's a better version of the Mark Richt era the last couple of years. And I like Mark Richt as a coach. I like him as a person. I don't really mean to pile on him, but those Georgia teams over the years, and that was part of the reason he ended up having to move on, right? There was a real sense that they were underachieving as a program. And they've settled into a niche now, it seems like, where they're better than they were then, but that tag seems to still apply.
It definitely does. It's just until they do it, Rick, I'm not going to pick them. Got to prove to me that they can do it before I have any faith in them.
I would agree. And in looking at it, yeah, I mean, and again, part of the reason that they really seem to be having a little bit of a reputation, deservedly so, as underachievers, since they haven't been able to slay the beast of Alabama in the conference, is that, again, the talent level, the recruiting is even better than it was under Rick, because Smart is an elite level recruiter, but they're still not at that point. At the end of the day, in the SEC, looking at that here, I do still see, once again, Alabama and Georgia leading their respective divisions at the end of the year. So I've got Alabama over Georgia again in the SEC championship game. I do think Texas A&M, LSU are really going to push Alabama to a degree. A&M more than they have since the start of the Jimbo Fisher era. I think Auburn, with a new coach, has a chance to make a little bit of noise, but I've got them behind A&M and LSU. In the East, I really think it's going to be interesting because I think Florida and Kentucky are going to be right there neck and neck with Georgia and making it interesting in the East Division.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it seems like Ole Miss and Mississippi State with their coaches, Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach, are going to be fun and exciting to watch. They may not win a lot of games, but they'll be fun to watch.
I agree, and to an extent, you could lump Arkansas in there in the West Division as well. This program, under the new direction they've been under for the last year or so, same thing. I don't look for anything great for them on the scoreboard or in the standings in the SEC West this year, but as far as the non-conference games and as far as being competitive in the games they lose, I do expect Arkansas to be a step up from what they've been over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, that's going to be Arkansas will be improved because they played some pretty good games last year, and their coach I love his passion when they on sidelines against big matchups.
Yeah, it's better days may be ahead for Arkansas, but they need to pray that there's some serious realignment coming when they step up in the number of teams here. Maybe they can get out of the division with Alabama and LSU and get into something else if there's the 4-team pods coming. In the East Division, I have to say that as a Tennessee fan, I always keep hoping for better times here. And we were talking about Smart being somebody that came from Saban's staff and very good in the recruiting. That had been the same with Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, but that era has abruptly come to an end with the scandal in the program there. Just the most recent bump in the road for a dormant college power that looks like it's going to, unfortunately, from my perspective, be dormant yet another year.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. I mean, but I hope to give them at least 4 years before because they got to really give a coach a commitment to build the program. Right?
They do, and it does seem like there's going to be stability here as far as alignment between coach and athletic director, so there is that, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a great year for Tennessee yet again. Right on the doorstep geographically of the SEC, the ACC, your backyard, Fran, as you get to watch a decent amount of football right there up close in the Triangle area. You've got, obviously, I think me and everybody else in America is picking Clemson as the winner of the Atlantic Division. But with North Carolina State and Louisville, I think, pushing them a little bit. I look for Florida State to have a little better of a year than they've done recently. I do have North Carolina winning the Coastal Division, as I'm sure a lot of people do this year. North Carolina, Miami, and to an extent Pittsburgh. That could be a little bit competitive in the Coastal. But how do you see the ACC shaping up?
Well, the thing is, I'm glad you didn't ask you to say the last name of the Clemson quarterback. You may be the only person that knows how to spell, right?
Yeah, very possibly, yeah. And it's not often that they have to make a big transition like that, but here we are.
Well, the thing is, with North Carolina, they're playing Virginia Tech this weekend, and that game's going to determine the path. If they stumble, with the hype they have, people will be very upset.
Yeah, they will. It will really derail the preseason hype. And Virginia Tech I see as being sort of a middle-of-the-pack team in the Coastal Division. So that will be something that will be very much worth watching. And, it's the story of the ACC over the last almost decade here has really been, ever since Jimbo Fisher left Florida State. And even before he left, I think Clemson had really kind of passed them by. But it's been more decisive now as far as passing them by. It's been Clemson, and it's been everybody else. In terms of Florida State, again, I don't think anybody expects that this is the year that rivalry reawakens and that they become a serious contender to beat Clemson. But how do you see the Florida State program stepping up this year in a year that many around there are citing as a cause for at least relative optimism?
One thing is they have a national spotlight with with Notre Dame that Sunday. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to beat Notre Dame, but I think it'll be close. I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Notre Dame, yes, of course, during the 2020 pandemic season, the little bit of a novelty here, spending a year inside the ACC. And, of course, they're back as far as being an independent this year and just having their arm's length relationship with the ACC, playing a number of regular season games. I will say this, that as far as it goes with them, when I look at the list of top games of the season, the list that we had made in Fantasy Football Draftology 2021, Notre Dame comes up on there a couple of different times, hosting USC on October 23rd. I have that rated as the 6th best game of the season. 5th best game, Cincinnati at Notre Dame, October 5th. And the 8th best game of the season, Notre Dame versus Wisconsin at Chicago, September 25th. So for Notre Dame, a quasi, not a member of the ACC, but an affiliated team, shall we say. They're one of these teams at the end of the year here where if it comes down to strength of schedule for one of these bubble playoff spots, Notre Dame's going to have a better leg to stand on than a lot of teams are.
Well, some of the experts think that they'll sneak in if they have like one loss.
Yeah, and their recent record in the playoff, I think, may work against them. As far as perceptions, but that's not supposed to be taken into account. It's just supposed to be what happens on the field during a given year. And if that is the case, Notre Dame's going to fare pretty well because, if you can get through that schedule with only one loss, you should be pretty good. If you can get through that with no losses, of course, they will be in. And mentioned Wisconsin, that's a team in the Big Ten here that I have being a strong contender in the Western Division. Ultimately, I have Iowa getting past them, but Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that is an interesting mix at the top of the Western Division. I had Nebraska slotted in 4th place, but that was before this past weekend here. Clearly, I was still way too high on them. In the East, and really in the conference writ large, it's Ohio State and everybody else at this point here. I've got Indiana, Penn State, Michigan coming up behind them, Michigan State, then following by. So much like with the ACC, you have one team standing astride and everyone really fighting to establish themselves as a legitimate second-place team in the conference, but in the ACC, it seems like there is no established second-place team. Looks like a much better year than usual for Indiana as far as where the state of their program. But Indiana, Iowa in the other division, Wisconsin in the other division, none of them at this point on the same tier as Ohio State, obviously.
Well, the thing is, Rick, they play Cincinnati this season, so that could be a game where hopefully Cincinnati doesn't sleep on them because Cincinnati needs that game if they want to. And they need to win that game and beat Notre Dame if they have any chance to get in the top 4. That's later in the program.
Oh, absolutely. And in the Big Ten, and there's a sense now that, and this is all in a relative sense, that Michigan might have a little better chance against Ohio State than at least the last 2 times out for Jim Harbaugh. But that's a program that, again, I think they have taken the pragmatic view at this point that they've been, as much as they've been Ohio State's whipping boy in the rivalry the last 20 years, and it oddly enough has accelerated under Harbaugh, which I don't think anybody expected, the whole sense that it's a long-term proposition to try to turn it around at Michigan, and that you're better off with Harbaugh as opposed to anybody else that you can get there. And it's not a popular assessment in the Michigan program, I think not least of which because Harbaugh is such a stubborn kind of a guy, and there's not necessarily the sense that he might be open to the type of growth and experimentation that it might take to get past Ohio State. But how do you see things going for Michigan this year, in a year where, like I said, relatively speaking, they seem to have a little more optimism than the last couple of years?
Well, the biggest problem, Rick, is that they have yet to find an elite quarterback.
Yes.
They have yet to find that guy, and he's a recruiter. I mean he's had good quarterbacks everywhere he's coached, and it makes no sense that they can't find an elite quarterback. It makes no sense, Rick. All the recruiting and all their facilities makes no sense at all, Rick.
It's really, really weird. And, I agree with you. It's not going to happen for them until they do. I mean, a program like Ohio State, if anything, the issue the last couple of years has been you can never have too many. I don't want to say too many of them, but a number of them. You got a couple of 5-star guys on the roster right now at Ohio State. Yeah, I mean, if Michigan could just live off the Ohio State surplus, it'd be a lot easier. But unfortunately for them, it doesn't work that way. In the Big 12, it's now a lame duck status the next couple of years, and we'll see how long that goes. I think it's probably not going to be as long as the contracts presently state. I want lame duck status for the two teams in the Red River Shootout, Oklahoma and Texas, but I've got Oklahoma in one of their last years in the Big 12, winning the conference. And again, as most people do, that's the chalk pick here. Most of the conference picks are chalk picks here. I think it takes until the Pac-12 for it to get even slightly kind of interesting as far as who's going to win. But I've got Iowa State slotted right behind them, and similar to Indiana, that this is a team that has been on the rise the last couple of years, and this projects to be the best season yet out of that rise in the program. I've got Texas slotted right behind Oklahoma State, TCU, West Virginia. So it's an interesting year. The Big 12 has a lot more competitive games in conference than do a lot of conferences. Again, Oklahoma may not be as strong of a favorite in their conference as Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson are, not least of which because they always seem to lose a game or two that they shouldn't lose during the season. That's where Riley and Stoops have had a lot in common, right? We talked about Georgia with underachieving, and for Oklahoma, they've taken that step up in the late years of the Stoops program, sort of reestablishing themselves, passing that on to Riley. But much like Georgia, they haven't been able to take the next step and be successful in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's been the biggest problem. And this year, a lot of people have them as getting to the Final Four, plus a couple people actually have them as possibly winning.
Yeah, and most years, they're good enough on paper. There had been some questions defensively a couple of years back in the program when they were really getting blown out in the big games, and they've tightened things up on that side of the ball. But, it's one of the conferences where on any given weekend, the games in conference, and I mentioned that at the top of the conference, my order was Oklahoma, Iowa State, Texas, Oklahoma State, TCU, West Virginia. And I've got Baylor slotted right behind them. Any games between any of those teams, really, projects to be pretty interesting. So it looks to be one of the more intriguing conferences on a week-to-week basis as far as watching games that should be really competitive and where either team could win.
Yeah, the Big 12 is always fun. The high-scoring shootout affairs, Texas Tech, Baylor, teams that like to score, Rick. It's going to be, Big 12 football is like watching a basketball game.
That's true. Yeah, it has that ethos to it, and in many ways, it has that in common with the Pac-12. The Pac-12 has long had teams that have really been able to air it out successfully, not least of which Oregon, who is my favorite in the North Division and who I do have winning the conference. In the North Division, I've got Oregon over Washington, Stanford, and then Cal. In the South Division, I've got USC with Arizona State, Utah, and UCLA nipping at them. And so, again, for the Pac-12, what it becomes is a matter of not cannibalizing each other as they seem to do. It's inexcusable, really, for the Pac-12 because, again, Alabama, they play in the toughest conference, but year in and year out, they seem to be able to find a way out of there. And in the Pac-12, whether it be Oregon, whether it be Washington, the last couple of years, whoever's the favorite on paper really kind of struggles to make it out of the conference unscathed. And ultimately, spoiler alert, I see this being yet another year where that's the case because I don't have Oregon as a playoff team. But the Pac-12, again, like the Big 12, you get a lot of games where they air it out. You get a lot of interesting results here, but a lot of times the bigger schools, the ones that you hope for as a Pac-12 fan, will represent your team in the playoffs, don't have a good enough record to make it there.
One thing is, Rick, week 2, Oregon plays Ohio State. I don't see Oregon winning that game. But the thing is, if Oregon somehow loses that game in a close game and they finish the rest of the season unscathed, they have a shot to make the Final Four.
They do. Absolutely, if they can make it through the conference. But, see, part of it's been the last couple of years, and I go back to It was an early season game, one of these September games a couple of years back. It was either Oregon or Washington that ended up playing Clemson. I don't remember which game that was, but it was a big early, or I'm sorry, maybe it was Auburn. And it was a big early season game, and the team lost. And it was like, well, okay, it's not even mid-September yet, and we already know the Pac-12 is not going to be represented in the playoffs. So if Oregon loses to Ohio State, it could be deja vu because, again, at that point, if you're the Pac-12 commissioner, you got to be hoping that Washington can make it through unscathed, or maybe USC can take that big step forward. And again, I think they can win the South Division, making it through the conference unscathed. I don't think they're good enough to be able to do that, not least of which, again, USC's got that game with Notre Dame looming non-conference. So, yes, the path to the Pac-12 sending a team to the playoff gets extraordinarily narrow if Oregon can't beat Ohio State.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest problem. But the thing is, the Pac-12 usually the conference champion has at least 2 or 3 losses. That's they lose teams that they're not supposed to lose to, and that's been the biggest problem with the Pac-12. Plus, the fact it's just they don't get the exposure as far as on TVs because sometimes they have like 10-30 games a night. People are not watching them.
That's true. People don't pay enough attention to the Pac-12 and to a lot of the interesting games that they have. There's no question about that. When we look at the other conferences here, a team that many people are high on this year and seems to be showing up in a lot of top 10 projections, Cincinnati in the AAC. I've got them as the champions. In Conference USA, I look at UAB coming out in the MAC. This was a projection set before Frank Solich retired, but I'm staying with it. The Fighting Bobcats of Ohio as your MAC champions this year. The Mountain West champion, I've got Boise State, and in the Sun Belt, I've got Louisiana. All of those teams would be jockeying for a spot in the New Year's Six games here. Of course, Cincinnati is the team, I think, at the beginning of the season that most are expecting would be able to find their way in there, Fran.
Well, Cincinnati will find their way in there. I mean, if they lose Notre Dame and Indiana, because if they have 2 losses, I see them. I still see them being a group of 5 getting in there. But if for some reason they stumble more, if Boise State can beat Central Florida in week 1, they might make a case at the end of the season.
I think so. And in my projections for the New Year's Six, I know we don't often tend to get rematches, but I think it might be possible. I've got Notre Dame, Cincinnati in the Fiesta Bowl, Florida, Texas A&M in the Sugar Bowl, Georgia, Oregon in the Rose Bowl, and Iowa State, North Carolina in the Peach Bowl. And again, that would be a pretty good slate of games for this year if that ended up happening. The New Year's Six games, again, the non-playoff games struggle to get the attention, but that would be a pretty good field, those 8 teams, if they end up making it in there.
Yeah, and those games would be fun to watch. And the thing is, this year, I believe, Rick, that the Final Four playoff games are on New Year's Eve. Is that correct?
They are actually, yes. And that is, I know they've tried to avoid that in recent years, but it is a deal where I think because with New Year's Eve, I believe, being a Friday, that they decided to kind of go back with that format. And I did notice that it looks like they're going to try and get the games in a little bit earlier. I think there is a little bit earlier start. Yeah, it is a Friday because they don't want the last one running close up until midnight. It's really an issue where, everybody's watching their, I know I'm dating myself by saying Dick Clark New Year's Eve, but, people have got their things they want to watch as the clock starts going towards midnight. And college football, particularly if it's a blowout, isn't one of them. And the last time they did this, the one that got it moved off of New Year's Eve, wasn't that the Cotton Bowl game where Alabama just beat the crap out of Michigan State? I think it was like 38-0, and everybody was tuned out by halftime. I think that was the game that got them off of New Year's Eve.
Yeah, and ESPN lost tons of money because of the low ratings.
That entire thing where they were running the commercials that year, like it's a new Year's Eve tradition, I'm just looking at it like, there are certain things in America that are just traditions that you are not going to be able to break. And people going out, I mean, obviously we're in a pandemic year, so people coming out just and doing things on New Year's Eve, much like last year, maybe a little bit different than usual. But in your average year, Fran, it's a matter where people have their New Year's Eve plans. We're going to go do this. We're going to go do that. The notion of I'm going to stay home and watch it on a place, or I'm going to hope that the place I'm going to for a party, that restaurant has a TV there where I can watch it. They're just really bucking against the tide there, where I know they felt like for scheduling purposes this year it probably had to be New Year's Eve, but I think they know what to expect after last time, and that being that you're going to struggle to get the kind of numbers you're looking for.
Yes, I mean, unless it's on a Saturday, you're going to struggle, Rick.
I think so, and looking at it here, I'm going to guess on the projections I have that the early game would be Alabama-Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl, because that's the one that I think would be thought to be less compelling, because, again, in such games, Alabama usually wins over Oklahoma, and I have them doing so again. That means I would have the Cotton Bowl going on last. Ohio State, Clemson. I do have Ohio State beating Clemson again, as they did last year, national championship, Alabama over Ohio State. So other than the fact that it's Oklahoma in the 4 playoff teams as opposed to, the way it went last year, to me, the more things change, the more they stay the same, Fran.
It seems like it's the same teams every year. It's a little bit boring, and I'd like to see some team come out of there and just give it a little flavor on the block. It's like chalk, like the NCAA tournament sometimes. Chalk.
It's becoming very top heavy, and one of these things here, as we start to bring this around by taking a look forward, is that, again, in the next couple of years, and like I said, I predict that Oklahoma and Texas will be in the SEC earlier than is presently forecast, because I think everyone is going to decide it's in their best interest to wrap up this lame duck period before the contract rolls all the way through. The notion now of this alliance, and we're only starting to get a sense of what that might be as it unfolds between the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12. So what are your thoughts on this, on what those conferences can do collectively to ward off the encroaching power of the SEC, which is getting bigger than ever?
It's kind of tough because they want to have an alliance. The problem is, Rick, the scheduling is so far years and years and years in advance. It's going to be forever until they can get more intriguing non-conference matchups, Rick.
Yeah, that's true, and that only really takes you so far. And alliance, you go back to when it was the Bowl Championship Alliance. I mean, every step along the way here, as far as how we've gotten to the playoff system that we had, I think it was the Bowl Alliance that started off at first. And it was a thing where eventually the BCS came around. When it's an alliance in college football, that's a relatively weak-sounding word a lot of times, and it really ends up being the case here, because it in a way, it's a weasel word. Like, what's it going to mean tangibly? And again, the ties that bind between the schools in the 3 conferences cannot nearly be what the ties will be between teams under the common SEC governance.
And the thing is, Rick, are some of these schools going to want to play tougher non-conference matchups? They want to get in the playoffs. They're not going to want to. I mean, they may have one marquee game. Do they want more than that? I don't think so, Rick.
Right. And it's a thing where it's very, very interesting, because the ACC, so long as they have Clemson, the Big Ten, so long as they have Ohio State, and that those teams remain in the positions that they are in, year in and year out, they're breathing easy. Everything goes according to form. They're going to be represented in the playoff at the end of the season here. The Pac-12 is the neediest team in this whole thing here, and it becomes things like, hey guys, what can you do to help us get a conference champion in there? It's not in the interest of the other 2 conferences necessarily to make it easier for the Pac-12. I mean, it's not in their best interest to make it harder on them either necessarily, but they're all after different things here. And for the Big Ten, which, because of the reach of the Big Ten network and the amount of money that the schools have, they're the second most powerful conference behind the SEC. So it almost kind of strikes me as like the other 2 schools trying to draft off the power of the Big Ten a little bit here. And at a certain point, the Big Ten is bound to take a look at this and say, why is it in our best interest to do this as opposed to really potentially getting radical and maybe trying to raid the other conferences? Because I do have a projection in our fantasy football draftology 2021 here of what the conferences might look like by 2025, and I do not rule out the notion of the Big Ten trying to raid the Pac-12 at a certain point of the best teams in there and creating like a Western pod, if you will. And that's a thing that the Pac-12 is trying to avoid by getting into bed with the Big Ten.
Yeah, because Big Ten is big. It's a big horse in the house. They're gonna, they'll be calling all the shots. So it's gonna, whatever favors them, whatever favors Ohio State, whatever favors Michigan, they're gonna be at the head table record.
Well, they're going to be. And that's the thing where when you're looking at it, if you're the Big Ten, I mean, you look at it and you want to play nice with the other conferences now. But at the end of the day, the Big Ten Network, which is the big driver here, how much more money would all the schools make if the Big Ten Network had a team in the Los Angeles market, in the Phoenix market? Again, they're going to be looking at these kind of things here down the road. And I predict that if the alliance implodes, the next thing that's going to happen is the Big Ten is going to make that aggressive and historic move on them. And that's the day everything really changes in college football on top of the seismic changes we've already seen thus far.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Rick. It's going to be a fun college football season. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun just to have games to bounce around. What I tend to do, Rick, is I tend to watch, if I'm home, if I'm not working, I'll watch the game, and then when it gets close, I'll zero in on it. That's how I follow college football on the weekends.
That's the great thing about it is that, yeah, there is so much there. You can kind of use it for background when you're not closely watching. You can closely watch when there's something worth closely watching. It's been, of course, as always, a great conversation with you, Fran. Any additional thoughts on the upcoming season from you that we didn't get to?
I'm looking forward to it, but one point I want to make, with the name, image, and likeness, the players are saying, Rick, the better they play, the more they get paid. So do you think this is going to be a distraction? I don't think it is, because they're going to be encouraged to play well and perform, because if they have a good season, they can make more money, these players.
Yeah, and you're now going to have outside forces coming into play, boosters being even more powerful than usual, because as we covered on our previous segment here together talking about this subject, that it's a legal way to funnel money to them. Even if your business is one that doesn't require sponsorship, you can still funnel money to a player. I'm like, well, he's advertising for our business. So you're going to have the voices from the outside coming in that much louder than usual. Coaches like Saban, Sweeney, Ryan Day, they're still going to have carte blanche at their own programs. But everybody else, it seems like, maybe Lincoln Riley will be exempt from this, but at every other program, these outside forces with the money are going to be something the coaches are going to have to listen to more than ever.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one more point I want to make, I'm so happy to see Lee Corso back on the college game day in person. 86 years old, God bless him. I love seeing him do his headgear selection at the end of the show. He was wrong this week, and he's wrong a lot of times when he does headgear. But, I mean, God bless him. 86, he has so much passion and energy. I love when he's on college football.
I agree, and, and that's the thing, Fran, is that in sports TV programming, there are so few things out there that are just reminders of, stuff that we grew up on and have enjoyed watching and everything. Like in college football, it's long since been. Keith Jackson has been off the scene and is even deceased at this point here. So in any sport, Vince Scully retiring in baseball in recent years, you don't have a lot of these things left. John Madden has been off the NFL for a good long period of time. So when you have something like Lee Corso on college football still, it is something to be appreciated and cherished because, again, you don't know how long it's going to continue to be the case. I hope he can still do it well into his 90s, and it'll be awesome if he can. But awesome, as I say, is always the word for our college football discussions. Fran Stuchbury from OurSports Central, thank you so much for your time, my friend.
Thanks, Rick. FDH Lounge is always elite.
Yes, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, buddy. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge Mini Episode 1374.